1. Against this Amasis then Cambyses the son of Cyrus was making his march, taking with him not only other nations of which he was ruler, but also Hellenes, both Ionians and Aeolians. 1. And the cause of the expedition was as follows. Cambyses sent an envoy to Egypt and asked Amasis to give him his daughter, and he made the request by counsel of an Egyptian, who brought this upon Amasis too, having a quarrel with him for the following reason. At the time when Cyrus sent to Amasis and asked him for a physician of the eyes, whosoever was the best of those in Egypt, Amasis had selected him from all the physicians in Egypt and had torn him away from his wife and children and delivered him up to Persia. Having, I say, this cause of quarrel, the Egyptian urged Cambyses on by his counsel, bidding him ask Amasis for his daughter, in order that he might either be grieved if he gave her, or if he refused to give her, might offend Cambyses. So Amasis, who was vexed by the power of the Persians and afraid of it, knew neither how to give nor how to refuse, for he was well assured that Cambyses did not intend to have her as his wife but as a concubine. So making account of the matter thus, he did as follows. There was a daughter of Apries the former king, very tall and comely of form and the only person left of his house, and her name was Nyctis. This girl Amasis adorned with raiment and with gold, and sent her away to Persia as his own daughter. But after a time, when Cambyses saluted her calling her by the name of her father, the girl said to him, O king, thou dost not perceive how thou hast been deceived by Amasis, for he adorned me with ornaments and sent me away giving me to thee as his own daughter, whereas in truth I am the daughter of Apries, against whom Amasis rose up with the Egyptians and murdered him, who was his lord and master. These words uttered in this occasion having arisen, led Cambyses the son of Cyrus against Egypt, moved to very great anger. 2. Such is the report made by the Persians, but as for the Egyptians they claim Cambyses as one of themselves, saying that he was born of this very daughter of Apries, for they say that Cyrus was he who sent to Amasis for his daughter, and not Cambyses. In saying this, however, they say not rightly, nor can they have failed to observe, for the Egyptians fully as well as any other people are acquainted with the laws and customs of the Persians, first that it is not customary among them for a bastard to become king, when there is a son born of a true marriage, and secondly that Cambyses was the son of Cassindae the daughter of Pharnaspes, a man of the Achaemenid family, and not the son of the Egyptian woman, but they pervert the truth of history, claiming to be kindred with the house of Cyrus. Thus it is with these matters. 3. And the following story is also told, which for my part one do not believe, namely that one of the Persian women came in to the wives of Cyrus, and when she saw standing by the side of Cassindae children comely of form and tall, she was loud in her praises of them, expressing great admiration, and Cassindae, who was the wife of Cyrus, spoke as follows, Nevertheless, though I am the mother of such children of these, Cyrus treats me with dishonor and holds in honor her whom he has brought in from Egypt. Thus she spoke, they say, being vexed by Nyctis, and upon that Cambyses the elder of her sons said, For this cause, mother, when I am grown to be a man, I will make that which is above in Egypt to be below, and that which is below above. This he is reported to have said when he was perhaps about 10 years old, and the women were astonished by it, and he, they say, kept it ever in mind, and so at last when he had become a man and had obtained the royal power, he made the expedition against Egypt. For another thing also contributed to this expedition, which was as follows. There was among the foreign mercenaries 3 of Amasis a man who was by race of Halicarnassos, and his name was Phans, one who was both capable in judgment and valiant in that which pertained to war. This Phans, having, as we may suppose, some quarrel with Amasis, fled away from Egypt in a ship, desiring to come to speech with Cambyses, and as he was of no small repute among the mercenaries and was very closely acquainted with all the affairs of Egypt, Amasis pursued him and considered it a matter of some moment to capture him, and he pursued by sending after him the most trusted of his eunuchs with a trireme, who captured him in Lycia, but having captured him he did not bring him back to Egypt, since Phans got the better of him by cunning, for he made his guards drunk and escaped to Persia. So when Cambyses had made his resolve to march upon Egypt, and was in difficulty about the march, as to how he should get safely through the waterless region, this man came to him, and besides informing of the other matters of Amasis, he instructed him also as to the march, advising him to send to the king of the Arabians and ask that he would give him safety of passage through this region. 5. now by this way only is there a known entrance to Egypt, for from Phoenicia to the borders of the city of Herodotus belongs to the Syrians who are called of Palestine, and from Herodotus, which is a city I suppose not much less than Sardis, from this city the trading stations on the seacoast as far as the city of Ionissos belong to the king of Arabia, and then from Ionissos again the country belongs to the Syrians as far as the Serbonian lake, along the side of which Mount Casion extends towards the sea. After that, from the Serbonian lake, in which the story goes that Typhon is concealed, from this point onwards the land is Egypt. Now the region which lies between the city of Ionissos on the one hand and Mount Casion and the Serbonian lake on the other, which is of no small extent but as much as a 3 days' journey, is grievously destitute of water. 6. And one thing I shall tell of, which few of those who go in ships to Egypt have observed, and it is this: into Egypt from all parts of Hellas and also from Phoenicia are brought twice every year earthenware jars full of wine, and yet it may almost be said that you cannot see there one single empty 5-wine jar. 7. In what manner, then, it will be asked, are they used up? This also I will tell. The headman 6 of each place must collect all the earthenware jars from his own town and convey them to Memphis, and those at Memphis must fill them with water and convey them to these same waterless regions of Syria. This the jars which come regularly to Egypt and are emptied 7 there, are carried to Syria to be added to that which has come before. It was the Persians who thus prepared this approach to Egypt, furnishing it with water in the manner which has been said, from the time when they first took possession of Egypt, but at the time of which I speak, seeing that water was not yet provided, Cambyses, in accordance with what he was told by his Halicarnassian guest, sent envoys to the Arabian king and from him asked and obtained the safe passage, having given him pledges of friendship and received them from him in return. 8. Now the Arabians have respect for pledges of friendship as much as those men in all the world who regard them most, and they give them in the following manner: a man different from those who desire to give the pledges to one another, standing in the midst between the two, cuts with a sharp stone the inner parts of the hands, along by the thumbs, of those who are giving the pledges to one another, and then he takes a thread from the cloak of each one and smears with the blood 7 stones laid in the midst between them, and as he does this he calls upon Dionysus and Urania. When the man has completed these ceremonies, he who has given the pledges commends to the care of his friends the stranger, or the fellow tribesman, if he is giving the pledges to one who was a member of his tribe, and the friends think it right that they also should have regard for the pledges given. Of gods they believe in Dionysus and Urania alone. Moreover they say that the cutting of their hair is done after the same fashion as that of Dionysus himself, and they cut their hair in a circle round, shaving away the hair of the temples. Now they call Dionysus Orotal 8 and Urania they call Alilat. 9. So then when the Arabian king had given the pledge of friendship to the men who had come to him from Cambyses, he contrived as follows: he took skins of camels and filled them with water and loaded them upon the backs of all the living camels that he had, and having so done he drove them to the waterless region and there awaited the army of Cambyses. This which has been related is the more credible of the accounts given, but the less credible must also be related, since it is a current account. There is a great river in Arabia called Chorus, and this runs out into the sea which is called Erythraean. From this river then it is said that the king of the Arabians, having got a conduit pipe made by sewing together raw ox hides and other skins, of such a length as to reach to the waterless region, conducted the water through these forsooth 9 and had great cisterns dug in the waterless region, that they might receive the water and preserve it. Now it is a journey of 12 days from the river to this waterless region, and moreover the story says that he conducted the water by 3 conduit pipes to 3 different parts of it. 10. Meanwhile Samanitos the son of Amasis was encamped at the Pelusian mouth of the Nile waiting for the coming of Cambyses, for Cambyses did not find Amasis yet living when he marched upon Egypt, but Amasis had died after having reigned 44 years during which no great misfortune had befallen him, and when he had died and had been embalmed he was buried in the burial place in the temple, which he had built for himself. 11. Now when Samanitos son of Amasis was reigning as king, there happened to the Egyptians a prodigy, the greatest that had ever happened, for rain fell at Thebes in Egypt, where never before had rain fallen nor afterwards down to my time, as the Thebans themselves say, for in the upper parts of Egypt no rain falls at all, but at the time of which I speak rain fell at Thebes in a drizzling shower. 12. 11. Now when the Persians had marched quite through the waterless region and were encamped near the Egyptians with design to engage battle, then the foreign mercenaries of the Egyptian king, who were Hellenes and Carians, having a quarrel with Phans because he had brought against Egypt an army of foreign speech, contrived against him as follows. Phans had children whom he had left behind in Egypt. These they brought to their camp and into the sight of their father, and they set up a mixing bowl between the two camps, and after that they brought up the children one by one and cut their throats so that the blood ran into the bowl. Then when they had gone through the whole number of the children, they brought and poured into the bowl both wine and water, and not until the mercenaries had all drunk of the blood did they engage battle. Then after a battle had been fought with great stubbornness, and very many had fallen of both the armies, the Egyptians at length turned to flight. 12. I was witness moreover of a great marvel, being informed of it by the natives of the place, for of the bones scattered about of those who fell in this fight, each side separately, since the bones of the Persians were lying apart on one side according as they were divided at first, and those of the Egyptians on the other, the skulls of the Persians are so weak that if you shall hit them only with a pebble you will make a hole in them, while those of the Egyptians are so exceedingly strong that you would hardly break them if you struck them with a large stone. The cause of it, they say, was this, and I for my part readily believe them, namely that the Egyptians beginning from their early childhood shave their heads, and the bone is thickened by exposure to the sun, and this is also the cause of their not becoming bald-headed, for among the Egyptians you see fewer bald-headed men than among any other race. This then is the reason why these have their skulls strong, and the reason why the Persians have theirs weak is that they keep them delicately in the shade from the first by wearing tiaras, that is felt caps. So far of this, and I saw also a similar thing to this at Paprimus, in the case of those who were slain together with Achaemenes the son of Dareios, by Inaros the Libyan. 13. The Egyptians when they turned to flight from the battle fled in disorder, and they being shut up in Memphis, Cambyses sent a ship of Mytilene up the river bearing a Persian herald, to summon the Egyptians to make terms of surrender, but they, when they saw the ship had entered into Memphis, pouring forth in a body from the fortress 13 both destroyed the ship and also tore the men in it limb from limb, and so bore them into the fortress. After this the Egyptians being besieged, in course of time surrendered themselves, and the Libyans who dwell on the borders of Egypt, being struck with terror by that which had happened to Egypt, delivered themselves up without resistance, and they both laid on themselves a tribute and sent presents, likewise also those of Cyrene and Barca, being struck with terror equally with 14 the Libyans, acted in a similar manner, and Cambyses accepted graciously the gifts which came from the Libyans, but as for those which came from the men of Cyrene, finding fault with them, as I suppose, because they were too small in amount, for the Cyrenians sent in fact 500 pounds weight 15 of silver, he took the silver by handfuls and scattered it with his own hand among his soldiers. 14. On the 10th day after that on which he received the surrender of the fortress of Memphis, Cambyses set the king of the Egyptians Samanitos, who had been king for 6 months, to sit in the suburb of the city, to do him dishonor. Him I say with other Egyptians he set there, and he proceeded to make trial of his spirit as follows. Having arrayed his daughter in the clothing of a slave, he sent her forth with a pitcher to fetch water, and with her he sent also other maidens chosen from the daughters of the chief men, arrayed as was the daughter of the king, and as the maidens were passing by their fathers with cries and lamentation, the other men all began to cry out and lament aloud, 16 seeing that their children had been evilly entreated, but Samanitos when he saw it before his eyes and perceived it bent himself down to the earth. Then when the water-bearers had passed by, next Cambyses sent his son with 2,000 Egyptians besides who were of the same age, with ropes bound round their necks and bits placed in their mouths, and these were being led away to execution to avenge the death of the Mytileneans who had been destroyed at Memphis with their ship. For the royal judges 17 had decided that for each man 10 of the noblest Egyptians should lose their lives in retaliation. He then, when he saw them passing out by him and perceived that his son was leading the way 18 to die, did the same as he had done with respect to his daughter, while the other Egyptians who sat round him were lamenting and showing signs of grief. When these also had passed by, it chanced that a man of his table companions, advanced in years, who had been deprived of all his possessions and had nothing except such things as a beggar possesses, and was asking alms from the soldiers, passed by Samanitos the son of Amasis and the Egyptians who were sitting in the suburb of the city, and when Samanitos saw him he uttered a great cry of lamentation, and he called his companion by name and beat himself upon the head. Now there was, it seems, men set to watch him, who made known to Cambyses all that he did on the occasion of each going forth, and Cambyses marveled at that which he did, and he sent a messenger and asked him thus, Samanitos, thy master Cambyses asks thee for what reason, when thou sawest thy daughter evilly entreated and thy son going to death, thou didst not cry aloud nor lament for them, whereas thou didst honor with these signs of grief the beggar who, as he hears from others, is not in any way related to thee? Thus he asked, and the other answered as follows, O son of Cyrus, my own troubles were too great for me to lament them aloud, but the trouble of my companion was such as called for tears, seeing that he has been deprived of great wealth, and has come to beggary upon the threshold of old age. When this saying was reported by the messenger, it seemed to them 19 that it was well spoken, and, as is reported by the Egyptians, Croesus shed tears, for he also, as fortune would have it, had accompanied Cambyses to Egypt, and the Persians who were present shed tears also, and there entered some pity into Cambyses himself, and forthwith he bade them save the life of the son of Samanitos from among those who were being put to death, and also he bade them raise Samanitos himself from his place in the suburb of the city and bring him into his own presence. 15. As for the son, those who went for him found that he was no longer alive, but had been cut down first of all, but Samanitos himself they raised from his place and brought him into the presence of Cambyses, with whom he continued to live for the rest of his time without suffering any violence, and if he had known how to keep himself from meddling with mischief, he would have received Egypt so as to be ruler of it, since the Persians are wont to honor the sons of kings, and even if the kings have revolted from them, they give back the power into the hands of their sons. Of this, namely that it is their established rule to act so, one may judge by many instances besides and especially 20 by the case of Thanyrus the son of Inaros, who received back the power which his father had, and by that of Posiris the son of Amyrtaeus, for he too received back the power of his father, yet it is certain that no men ever up to this time did more evil to the Persians than Inaros and Amyrtaeus. As it was, however, Samanitos devised evil and received the due reward, for he was found to be inciting the Egyptians to revolt, and when this became known to Cambyses, Samanitos drank bull's blood and died forthwith. Thus he came to his end. 16. From Memphis Cambyses came to the city of Sais with the purpose of doing that which in fact he did, for when he had entered into the palace of Amasis, he forthwith gave command to bring the corpse of Amasis forth out of his burial place, and when this had been accomplished, he gave command to scourge it and pluck out the hair and stab it, and to do to it dishonor in every possible way besides, and when they had done this too until they were wearied out, for the corpse being embalmed held out against the violence and did not fall to pieces in any part, Cambyses gave command to consume it with fire, enjoining thereby a thing which was not permitted by religion, for the Persians hold fire to be a god. To consume corpses with fire then is by no means according to the custom of either people, of the Persians for the reason which has been mentioned, since they say that it is not right to give the dead body of a man to a god, while the Egyptians have the belief established that fire is a living wild beast, and that it devours everything which it catches, and when it is satiated with the food it dies itself together with that which it devours, but it is by no means their custom to give the corpse of a man to wild beasts, for which reason they embalm it, that it may not be eaten by worms as it lies in the tomb. Thus then Cambyses was enjoining them to do that which is not permitted by the customs of either people. However, the Egyptians say that it was not Amasis who suffered this outrage, but another of the Egyptians who was of the same stature of body as Amasis, and that to him the Persians did outrage, thinking that they were doing it to Amasis, for they say that Amasis learned from an oracle that which was about to happen with regard to himself after his death, and accordingly, to avert the evil which threatened to come upon him, he buried the dead body of this man who was scourged within his own sepulchral chamber near the doors, and enjoined his son to lay his own body as much as possible in the inner recess of the chamber. These injunctions, said to have been given by Amasis with regard to his burial and with regard to the man mentioned, were not in my opinion really given at all, but I think that the Egyptians make pretense of it from pride and with no good ground. 17. After this Cambyses planned 3 several expeditions, one against the Carthaginians, another against the Ammonians, and a third against the long-lived Ethiopians, who dwell in that part of Libya which is by the southern sea, and informing these designs he resolved to send his naval force against the Carthaginians, and a body chosen from his land army against the Ammonians, and to the Ethiopians to send spies first, both to see whether the table of the sun existed really, which is said to exist among these Ethiopians, and in addition to this to spy out all else, but pretending to be bearers of gifts for their king. 18. Now the table of the sun is said to be as follows. There is a meadow in the suburb of their city full of flesh meat boiled of all four-footed creatures, and in this, it is said, those of the citizens who were in authority at the time place the flesh by night, managing the matter carefully, and by day any man who wishes comes there and feasts himself, and the natives, it is reported, say that the earth of herself produces these things continually. 19. Of such nature is the so-called table of the sun said to be. So when Cambyses had resolved to send the spies, forthwith he sent for those men of the Ichthyophagoi who understood the Ethiopian tongue, to come from the city of Elephantine, and while they were going to fetch these men, he gave command to the fleet to sail against Carthage, but the Phoenicians said that they would not do so, for they were bound not to do so by solemn vows, and they would not be acting piously if they made expedition against their own sons, and as the Phoenicians were not willing, the rest were rendered unequal to the attempt. Thus then the Carthaginians escaped being enslaved by the Persians, for Cambyses did not think it right to apply force to compel the Phoenicians, both because they had delivered themselves over to the Persians of their own accord and because the whole naval force was dependent upon the Phoenicians. Now the men of Cyprus also had delivered themselves over to the Persians, and were joining in the expedition against Egypt. 20. Then as soon as the Ichthyophagoi came to Cambyses from Elephantine, he sent them to the Ethiopians, enjoining them what they should say and giving them gifts to bear with them, that is to say a purple garment, and a collar of twisted gold with bracelets, and an alabaster box of perfumed ointment, and a jar of palm wine. Now these Ethiopians to whom Cambyses was sending are said to be the tallest and the most beautiful of all men, and besides other customs which they are reported to have different from other men, there is especially this, it is said, with regard to their regal power, whomsoever of the men of their nation they judge to be the tallest and to have strength in proportion to his stature, this man they appoint to reign over them. 21. So when the Ichthyophagoi had come to this people they presented their gifts to the king who ruled over them, and at the same time they said as follows, the king of the Persians Cambyses, desiring to become a friend and guest to thee, sent us with command to come to speech with thee, and he gives thee for gifts these things which he himself most delights to use. The Ethiopian, however, perceiving that they had come as spies, spoke to them as follows, neither did the king of the Persians send you bearing gifts because he thought it a matter of great moment to become my guest friend, nor do ye speak true things, for ye have come as spies of my kingdom, nor again is he a righteous man, for if he had been righteous he would not have coveted a land other than his own, nor would he be leading away into slavery men at whose hands he has received no wrong. Now however give him this bow and speak to him these words. The king of the Ethiopians gives this counsel to the king of the Persians, that when the Persians draw their bows, of equal size to mine, as easily as I do this, then he should march against the long-lived Ethiopians, provided that he be superior in numbers, but until that time he should feel gratitude to the gods that they do not put it into the mind of the sons of the Ethiopians to acquire another land in addition to their own. 22. Having thus said and having unbent the bow, he delivered it to those who had come. Then he took the garment of purple and asked what it was and how it had been made, and when the Ichthyophagoi had told him the truth about the purple fish and the dyeing of the tissue, he said that the men were deceitful and deceitful also were their garments. Then secondly he asked concerning the twisted gold of the collar and the bracelets, and when the Ichthyophagoi were setting forth to him the manner in which it was fashioned, the king broke into a laugh and said, supposing them to be fetters, that they had stronger fetters than those in their country. Thirdly he asked about the perfumed ointment, and when they had told him of the manner of its making and of the anointing with it, he said the same as he had said before about the garment. Then when he came to the wine, and had learned about the manner of its making, being exceedingly delighted with the taste of the drink he asked besides what food the king ate, and what was the longest time that a Persian man lived. They told him that he ate bread, explaining to him first the manner of growing the wheat, and they said that 80 years was the longest term of life appointed for a Persian man. In answer to this the Ethiopian said that he did not wonder that they lived but a few years, when they fed upon dung, for indeed they would not be able to live even so many years as this, if they did not renew their vigor with the drink, indicating to the ichthyophagoi the wine, for in regard to this, he said, his people were much behind the Persians. 23. Then when the ichthyophagoi asked the king in return about the length of days and the manner of life of his people, he answered that the greater number of them reached the age of 120 years, and some surpassed even this, and their food was boiled flesh and their drink was milk. And when the spies marveled at the number of years, he conducted them to a certain spring, in the water of which they washed and became more sleek of skin, as if it were a spring of oil, and from it there came a scent as it were of violets, and the water of this spring, said the spies, was so exceedingly weak that it was not possible for anything to float upon it, either wood or any of those things which are lighter than wood, but they all went to the bottom. If this water which they have be really such as it is said to be, it would doubtless be the cause why the people are long lived, as making use of it for all the purposes of life. Then when they departed from this spring, he led them to a prison house for men, and there all were bound in fetters of gold. Now among these Ethiopians bronze is the rarest and most precious of all things. Then when they had seen the prison house they saw also the so-called table of the sun. 24. And after this they saw last of all their receptacles of dead bodies, which are said to be made of crystal in the following manner: when they have dried the corpse, whether it be after the Egyptian fashion or in some other way, they cover it over completely with plaster 21 and then adorn it with painting, making the figure as far as possible like the living man. After this they put about it a block of crystal hollowed out, for this they dig up in great quantity and it is very easy to work, and the dead body being in the middle of the block is visible through it, but produces no unpleasant smell nor any other effect which is unseemly, and it has all its parts visible like the dead body itself. For a year then they who are most nearly related to the man keep the block in their house, giving to the dead man the first share of everything in offering to him sacrifices, and after this period they carry it out and set it up round about the city. 25. After they had seen all, the spies departed to go back, and when they reported these things, forthwith Cambyses was enraged and proceeded to march his army against the Ethiopians, not having ordered any provision of food nor considered with himself that he was intending to march an army to the furthest extremities of the earth, but as one who was mad and not in his right senses. When he heard the report of the ichthyophagoi he began the march, ordering those of the Hellenes who were present to remain behind in Egypt, and taking with him his whole land force. And when in the course of his march he had arrived at Thebes, he divided off about 50,000 of his army, and these he enjoined to make slaves of the Ammonians and to set fire to the seat of the oracle of Zeus, but he himself with the remainder of his army went on against the Ethiopians. But before the army had passed over the fifth part of the way, all that they had of provisions came to an end completely, and then after the provisions the beasts of burden also were eaten up and came to an end. Now if Cambyses when he perceived this had changed his plan and led his army back, he would have been a wise man in spite of 22 his first mistake. As it was, however, he paid no regard, but went on forward without stopping. The soldiers accordingly, so long as they were able to get anything from the ground, prolonged their lives by eating grass, but when they came to the sand, some did a fearful deed, that is to say, out of each company of 10 they selected by lot one of themselves and devoured him, and Cambyses, when he heard it, being alarmed by this eating of one another gave up the expedition against the Ethiopians and set forth to go back again, and he arrived at Thebes having suffered loss of a great number of his army. Then from Thebes he came down to Memphis and allowed the Hellenes to sail away home. 26. Thus fared the expedition against the Ethiopians, and those of the Persians who had been sent to march against the Ammonians set forth from Thebes and went on their way with guides, and it is known that they arrived at the city of Oasis, which is inhabited by Samians said to be of the Ascreonian tribe, and is distant 7 days' journey from Thebes over sandy desert. Now this place is called in the speech of the Hellenes the Isle of the Blessed. It is said that the army reached this place, but from that point onwards, except the Ammonians themselves and those who have heard the account from them, no man is able to say anything about them, for they neither reached the Ammonians nor returned back. This, however, is added to the story by the Ammonians themselves. They say that as the army was going from this oasis through the sandy desert to attack them, and had got to a point about midway between them and the oasis, while they were taking their morning meal a violent south wind blew upon them, and bearing with it heaps of the desert sand, it buried them under it, and so they disappeared and were seen no more. Thus the Ammonians say that it came to pass with regard to this army. 27. When Cambyses arrived at Memphis, Apis appeared to the Egyptians, whom the Hellenes call Epiphos, and when he had appeared, forthwith the Egyptians began to wear their fairest garments and to have festivities. Cambyses, accordingly, seeing the Egyptians doing thus, and supposing that they were certainly acting so by way of rejoicing because he had fared ill, called for the officers who had charge of Memphis, and when they had come into his presence, he asked them why, when he was at Memphis on the former occasion, the Egyptians were doing nothing of this kind, but only now, when he came there after losing a large part of his army. They said that a god had appeared to them, who was wont to appear at intervals of long time, and that whenever he appeared, then all the Egyptians rejoiced and kept festival. Hearing this, Cambyses said that they were lying, and as liars he condemned them to death. 28. Having put these to death, next he called the priests into his presence, and when the priests answered him after the same manner, he said that it should not be without his knowledge if a tame god had come to the Egyptians, and having so said he bade the priests bring Apis away into his presence, so they went to bring him. Now this Apis Epiphos is a calf born of a cow who after this is not permitted to conceive any other offspring, and the Egyptians say that a flash of light comes down from heaven upon this cow, and of this she produces Apis. This calf, which is called Apis, is black and has the following signs, namely a white square 23 upon the forehead, and on the back the likeness of an eagle, and in the tail the hairs are double, and on 24 the tongue there is a mark like a beetle. 29. When the priests had brought Apis, Cambyses, being somewhat affected with madness, drew his dagger, and aiming at the belly of Apis, struck his thigh. Then he laughed and said to the priests, O ye wretched creatures, are gods born such as this, with blood and flesh, and sensible of the stroke of iron weapons? Worthy indeed of Egyptians is such a god as this. Ye, however, at least shall not escape without punishment for making a mock of me. Having thus spoken, he ordered those whose duty it was to do such things, to scourge the priests without mercy, and to put to death any one of the other Egyptians whom they should find keeping the festival. Thus the festival of the Egyptians had been brought to an end, and the priests were being chastised, and Apis, wounded by the stroke in his thigh, lay dying in the temple. 30. Him, when he had brought his life to an end by reason of the wound, the priests buried without the knowledge of Cambyses, but Cambyses, as the Egyptians say, immediately after this evil deed became absolutely mad, not having been really in his right senses even before that time, and the first of his evil deeds was that he put to death his brother Smerdis, who was of the same father and the same mother as himself. This brother he had sent away from Egypt to Persia in envy, because alone of all the Persians he had been able to draw the bow which the Ichthyophagoi brought from the Ethiopian king, to an extent of about 2 finger breadths, while of the other Persians not one had proved able to do this. Then when Smerdis had gone away to Persia, Cambyses saw a vision in his sleep of this kind. It seemed to him that a messenger came from Persia and reported that Smerdis, sitting upon the royal throne, had touched the heaven with his head. Fearing therefore with regard to this lest his brother might slay him and reign in his stead, he sent Prexaspes to Persia, the man whom of all the Persians he trusted most, with command to slay him. He accordingly went up to Susa and slew Smerdis, and some say that he took him out of the chase and so slew him, others that he brought him to the Erythraean Sea and drowned him. 31. This they say was the first beginning of the evil deeds of Cambyses, and next after this he put to death his sister, who had accompanied him to Egypt, to whom also he was married, she being his sister by both parents. Now he took her to wife in the following manner, for before this the Persians had not been wont at all to marry their sisters. Cambyses fell in love with one of his sisters, and desired to take her to wife, so since he had it in mind to do that which was not customary, he called the royal judges and asked them whether there existed any law which permitted him who desired it to marry his sister. Now the royal judges are men chosen out from among the Persians, and hold their office until they die or until some injustice is found in them, so long and no longer. These pronounce decisions for the Persians and are the expounders of the ordinances of their fathers, and all matters are referred to them. So when Cambyses asked them, they gave him an answer which was both upright and safe, saying that they found no law which permitted a brother to marry his sister, but apart from that they had found a law to the effect that the king of the Persians might do whatsoever he desired. Thus on the one hand they did not tamper with the law for fear of Cambyses, and at the same time, that they might not perish themselves in maintaining the law, they found another law beside that which was asked for, which was in favor of him who wished to marry his sisters. So Cambyses at that time took to wife her with whom he was in love, but after no long time he took another sister. Of these it was the younger whom he put to death, she having accompanied him to Egypt. 32. About her death, as about the death of Smyrtis, two different stories are told. The Hellenes say that Cambyses had matched a lion's cub in fight with a dog's whelp, and this wife of his was also a spectator of it, and when the whelp was being overcome, another whelp, its brother, broke its chain and came to help it, and having become two instead of one, the whelps then got the better of the cub, and Cambyses was pleased at the sight, but she sitting by him began to weep, and Cambyses perceived it and asked wherefore she wept, and she said that she had wept when she saw that the whelp had come to the assistance of its brother, because she remembered Smyrtis and perceived that there was no one who would come to his 25 assistance. The Hellenes say that it was for this saying that she was killed by Cambyses, but the Egyptians say that as they were sitting round at table, the wife took a lettuce and pulled off the leaves all round, and then asked her husband whether the lettuce was fairer when thus plucked round or when covered with leaves, and he said, when covered with leaves. She then spoke thus, nevertheless thou didst once produce the likeness of this lettuce, when thou didst strip bare the house of Cyrus. And he moved to anger leapt upon her, being with child, and she miscarried and died. 33. These were the acts of madness done by Cambyses towards those of his own family, whether the madness was produced really on account of Apis or from some other cause, as many ills are wont to seize upon men, for it is said moreover that Cambyses had from his birth a certain grievous malady, that which is called by some the sacred disease. 26. And it was certainly nothing strange that when the body was suffering from a grievous malady, the mind should not be sound either. 34. The following also are acts of madness which he did to the other Persians, to Prexaspes, the man whom he honored most and who used to bear his messages 2601, his son also was cupbearer to Cambyses, and this too was no small honor. To him it is said that he spoke as follows, Prexaspes, what kind of a man do the Persians esteem me to be, and what speech do they hold concerning me? And he said, Master, in all other respects thou art greatly commended, but they say that thou art overmuch given to love of wine. Thus he spoke concerning the Persians, and upon that Cambyses was roused to anger, and answered thus, It appears then that the Persians say I am given to wine, and that therefore I am beside myself and not in my right mind, and their former speech then was not sincere. For before this time, it seems, when the Persians and Croesus were sitting with him in council, Cambyses asked what kind of a man they thought he was as compared with his father Cyrus. 27. And they answered that he was better than his father, for he not only possessed all that his father had possessed, but also in addition to this had acquired Egypt and the sea. Thus the Persians spoke, but Croesus, who was present and was not satisfied with their judgment, spoke thus to Cambyses, To me, O son of Cyrus, thou dost not appear to be equal to thy father, for not yet hast thou a son such as he left behind him in you. Hearing this Cambyses was pleased, and commended the judgment of Croesus. 35. So calling to mind this, he said in anger to Prexaspes, Learn then now for thyself whether the Persians speak truly, or whether when they say this they are themselves out of their senses. For if I, shooting at thy son there standing before the entrance of the chamber, hit him in the very middle of the heart, the Persians will be proved to be speaking falsely, but if I miss, then thou mayest say that the Persians are speaking the truth and that I am not in my right mind. Having thus said he drew his bow and hit the boy, and when the boy had fallen down, it is said that he ordered them to cut open his body and examine the place where he was hit, and as the arrow was found to be sticking in the heart, he laughed and was delighted, and said to the father of the boy, Prexaspes, It has now been made evident, as thou sayest, that I am not mad, but that it is the Persians who are out of their senses. And now tell me, whom of all men didst thou ever see before this time hit the mark so well in shooting? Then Prexaspes, seeing that the man was not in his right senses and fearing for himself, said, Master, I think that not even God himself could have hit the mark so fairly. Thus he did at that time, and at another time he condemned 12 of the Persians, men equal to the best, on a charge of no moment, and buried them alive with the head downwards. 36. When he was doing these things, Croesus the Lydian judged it right to admonish him in the following words, O king, do not thou indulge the heat of thy youth and passion in all things, but retain and hold thyself back. It is a good thing to be prudent, and forethought is wise. Thou, however, art putting to death men who are of thine own people, condemning them on charges of no moment, and thou art putting to death men's sons also. If thou do many such things, beware lest the Persians make revolt from thee. As for me, thy father Cyrus gave me charge, earnestly bidding me to admonish thee, and suggest to thee that which I should find to be good. Thus he counselled him, manifesting goodwill towards him, but Cambyses answered, Dost thou venture to counsel me, who excellently well didst rule thine own country, and well didst counsel my father, bidding him pass over the river Araxes and go against the Massajdai, when they were willing to pass over into our land, and so didst utterly ruin thyself by ill government of thine own land, and didst utterly ruin Cyrus, who followed thy counsel. However, thou shalt not escape punishment now, for know that before this I had very long been desiring to find some occasion against thee. Thus having said, he took his bow, meaning to shoot him, but Croesus started up and ran out, and so since he could not shoot him, he gave orders to his attendants to take and slay him. The attendants, however, knowing his moods, concealed Croesus, with the intention that if Cambyses should change his mind and seek to have Croesus again, they might produce him and receive gifts as the price of saving his life, but if he did not change his mind nor feel desire to have him back, then they might kill him. Not long afterwards Cambyses did in fact desire to have Croesus again, and the attendants perceiving this reported to him that he was still alive, and Cambyses said that he rejoiced with Croesus that he was still alive, but that they who had preserved him should not get off free, but he would put them to death, and thus he did. 37. Many such acts of madness did he both to Persians and allies, remaining at Memphis and opening ancient tombs and examining the dead bodies. Likewise also he entered into the temple of Hephaestos and very much derided the image of the god, for the image of Hephaestos very nearly resembles the Phoenician Pataikoi, which the Phoenicians carry about on the prows of their triremes, and for him who has not seen these, I will indicate its nature. It is the likeness of a dwarfish man. He entered also into the temple of the Kabiroi, into which it is not lawful for anyone to enter except the priest only, and the images there he even set on fire, after much mockery of them. Now these also are like the images of Hephaestos, and it is said that they are the children of that god. 38. It is clear to me therefore by every kind of proof that Cambyses was mad exceedingly, for otherwise he would not have attempted to deride religious rites and customary observances. For if one should propose to all men a choice, bidding them select the best customs from all the customs that there are, each race of men, after examining them all, would select those of his own people, thus all think that their own customs are by far the best, and so it is not likely that any but a madman would make a jest of such things. Now of the fact that all men are thus wont to think about their customs, we may judge by many other proofs, and more especially by this which follows. Darius in the course of his reign summoned those of the Hellenes who were present in his land, and asked them for what price they would consent to eat up their fathers when they died, and they answered that for no price would they do so. After this Darius summoned those Indians who were called Calations, who eat their parents, and asked them in presence of the Hellenes, who understood what they said by help of an interpreter, for what payment they would consent to consume with fire the bodies of their fathers when they died, and they cried out aloud and bade him keep silence from such words. Thus then these things are established by usage, and I think that Pindar spoke rightly in his verse, when he said that of all things law is king. 28. 39. Now while Cambyses was marching upon Egypt, the Lacedaemonians also had made an expedition against Samos and against Polycrates the son of Aiax, who had risen against the government and obtained rule over Samos. At first he had divided the state into 3 parts and had given a share to his brothers Pantagnotos and Silason, but afterwards he put to death one of these, and the younger, namely Silason, he drove out, and so obtained possession of the whole of Samos. Then, being in possession, 29 he made a guest friendship with Amasis the king of Egypt, sending him gifts and receiving gifts in return from him. After this straightway within a short period of time the power of Polycrates increased rapidly, and there was much fame of it not only in Ionia, but also over the rest of Hellas, for to whatever part he directed his forces, everything went fortunately for him, and he had got for himself 150 oared galleys and 1,000 archers, and he plundered from all, making no distinction of any, for it was his wont to say that he would win more gratitude from his friend by giving back to him that which he had taken, than by not taking at all. 30 So he had conquered many of the islands and also many cities of the continent, and besides other things he gained the victory in a sea fight over the Lesbians, as they were coming to help the Milesians with their forces, and conquered them. These men dug the whole trench round the wall of the city of Samos, working in chains. 40 Now Amasis, as may be supposed, did not fail to perceive that Polycrates was very greatly fortunate, and 31 It was to him an object of concern, and as much more good fortune yet continued to come to Polycrates. He wrote upon a paper these words and sent them to Samos. Amasis to Polycrates thus saith, It is a pleasant thing indeed to hear that one who is a friend and guest is faring well, yet to me thy great good fortune is not pleasing, since I know that the divinity is jealous, and I think that I desire, both for myself and for those about whom I have care, that in some of our affairs we should be prosperous and in others should fail, and thus go through life alternately faring 32 well and ill, rather than that we should be prosperous in all things, for never yet did I hear tell of anyone who was prosperous in all things and did not come to an utterly 33 evil end at the last. Now therefore do thou follow my counsel and act as I shall say with respect to thy prosperous fortunes. Take thought and consider, and that which thou findest to be the most valued by thee, and for the loss of which thou wilt most be vexed in thy soul, that take and cast away in such a manner that it shall never again come to the sight of men. And if in future from that time forward good fortune does not befall thee in alternation with calamities, 34 Apply remedies in the manner by me suggested. 41 Polycrates, having read this and having perceived by reflection that Amasis suggested to him good counsel, sought to find which one of his treasures he would be most afflicted in his soul to lose, and seeking he found this which I shall say. He had a signet which he used to wear, enchased in gold and made of an emerald stone, and it was the work of Theodoros the son of Telecles of Samos. 35 Seeing then that he thought it good to cast this away, he did thus. He manned a 50-oared galley with sailors and went on board of it himself, and then he bade them put out into the deep sea. And when he had got to a distance from the island, he took off the signet ring, and in the sight of all who were with him in the ship he threw it into the sea. Thus having done he sailed home, and when he came to his house he mourned for his loss. 42 But on the 5th or 6th day after these things had happened to him as follows. A fisherman having caught a large and beautiful fish, thought it right that this should be given as a gift to Polycrates. He bore it therefore to the door of the palace and said that he desired to come into the presence of Polycrates, and when he had obtained this he gave him the fish, saying, O king, having taken this fish I did not think fit to bear it to the market, although I am one who lives by the labor of his hands, but it seemed to me that it was worthy of thee and of thy monarchy, therefore I bring it and present it to thee. He then, being pleased at the words spoken, answered thus, Thou didst exceedingly well, and double thanks are due to thee, for thy words and also for thy gift, and we invite thee to come to dinner. The fisherman then, thinking this a great thing, went away to this house, and the servants as they were cutting up the fish found in its belly the signet ring of Polycrates. Then as soon as they had seen it and taken it up, they bore it rejoicing to Polycrates, and giving him the signet ring they told him in what manner it had been found, and he perceiving that the matter was of God, wrote upon paper all that he had done and all that had happened to him, and having written he dispatched it to Egypt. 36 43 Then Amasis, when he had read the paper which had come from Polycrates, perceived that it was impossible for man to rescue man from the event which was to come to pass, and that Polycrates was destined not to have a good end, being prosperous in all things, seeing that he found again even that which he cast away. Therefore he sent an envoy to him in Samos and said that he broke off the guest friendship, and this he did lest when a fearful and great mishap befell Polycrates, he might himself be grieved in his soul as for a man who was his guest. 44 It was this Polycrates then, prosperous in all things, against whom the Lacedaemonians were making an expedition, being invited by those Samians who afterwards settled at Kydonia in Crete, to come to their assistance. Now Polycrates had sent an envoy to Cambyses the son of Cyrus without the knowledge of the Samians, as he was gathering an army to go against Egypt, and had asked him to send to him in Samos and to ask for an armed force. So Cambyses hearing this very readily sent to Samos to ask Polycrates to send a naval force with him against Egypt, and Polycrates selected of the citizens those whom he most suspected of desiring to rise against him and sent them away in 40 triremes, charging Cambyses not to send them back. 45 Now some say that those of the Samians who were sent away by Polycrates never reached Egypt, but when they arrived on their voyage at Carpathos, 37 they considered with themselves, and resolved not to sail on any further. Others say that they reached Egypt, and being kept under guard there, they made their escape from thence. Then, as they were sailing into Samos, Polycrates encountered them with ships and engaged battle with them, and those who were returning home had the better and landed in the island. But having fought a land battle in the island, they were worsted, and so sailed to Lacedaemon. Some however say that those from Egypt defeated Polycrates in the battle, but this in my opinion is not correct, for there would have been no need for them to invite the assistance of the Lacedaemonians if they had been able by themselves to bring Polycrates to terms. Moreover, it is not reasonable either, seeing that he had foreign mercenaries and native archers very many in number, to suppose that he was worsted by the returning Samians, who were but few. Then Polycrates gathered together the children and wives of his subjects and confined them in the shipsheds, keeping them ready so that, if it should prove that his subjects deserted to the side of the returning exiles, he might burn them with the sheds. 46. When those of the Samians who had been driven out by Polycrates reached Sparta, they were introduced before the magistrates and spoke at length, being urgent in their request. The magistrates, however, at the first introduction replied that they had forgotten the things which had been spoken at the beginning, and did not understand those which were spoken at the end. After this they were introduced a second time, and bringing with them a bag they said nothing else but this, namely that the bag was in want of meal, to which the others replied that they had overdone it with the bag. 38 However, they resolved to help them. 47. Then the Lacedaemonians prepared a force and made expedition to Samos, in repayment of former services, as the Samians say, because the Samians had first helped them with ships against the Messenians, but the Lacedaemonians say that they made the expedition not so much from desire to help the Samians at their request, as to take vengeance on their own behalf for the robbery of the mixing bowl which they had been bearing as a gift to Croesus, 39 and of the corslet which Amasis the king of Egypt had sent as a gift to them, for the Samians had carried off the corslet also in the year before they took the bowl, and it was of linen with many figures woven into it and embroidered with gold and with cotton, and each thread of this corslet is worthy of admiration, for that being itself fine it has in it 360 fibers, all plain to view. Such another as this moreover is that which Amasis dedicated as an offering to Athene at Lindos.